The stranger in the camp the fire had almost burned out. The human soldier lay wrapped in his thin blanket, staring up at the broken sky through the cracks in the jungle canopy. He was far from home, stranded after the battle, his body bruised and his supplies nearly gone. The forest around him was alive with strange sounds, low growls, soft clicks, and the rustle of unseen creatures moving in the dark. He forced his eyes shut, telling himself to rest. Just a few hours of sleep before moving again at dawn. That was all he needed. But then something tugged at him. At first he thought it was a dream. A small pull at the edge of his blanket, gentle, almost playful. Then it grew harder, rougher. The soldier's eyes snapped open. There, at the edge of the firelight, two tiny shapes struggled with the cloth. He pushed himself up, blinking through the shadows. What he saw made him freeze. Two alien girls. They were no taller than 3 feet, their bodies slim but wiry, their skin faintly glowing in the darkness. Their large, round eyes reflected the firelight like golden glass. Each one clutched his blanket in small clawed hands, pulling it toward herself, hissing angrily at the other. The soldier blinked again, half convinced his tired mind was tricking him. But no, this was real. 2 alien girls, fighting over his blanket like children fighting for a toy. For a moment he simply stared. They tugged and growled, each refusing to let go. The blanket stretched tight between them, his only shield against the cold night. "Hey," he rasped, his voice rough. "That's mine." Both heads snapped toward him. The soldier's heart skipped a beat. Their glowing eyes locked on his, wide and alert. For a long second, the jungle went utterly still. He expected them to flee, or attack or scream. Instead, they clutched the blanket tighter. One let out a sharp hiss at the other, then tugged the cloth harder, dragging it closer to the human. The other snarled back and pulled in the opposite direction, her feet sliding in the dirt. It was only then the soldier realized they weren't just fighting for the blanket. They were fighting for him. The smaller of the two crept closer, her claws still hooked into the fabric. She bared her teeth as if daring her rival to come nearer. The other girl growled, stamping her tiny foot before rushing forward and grabbing the soldier's arm. The soldier jerked in surprise. Her grip was strong, far stronger than he expected for her size. She held on tight, glaring at the other girl, as if to say, "He's mine." The rival hissed again and scrambled closer, latching onto his other arm. Now he was caught in the middle, a 3-foot alien girl clinging stubbornly to each side of him. The soldier groaned. What is happening here? The two girls argued in their strange language, a rapid mix of clicks and melodic tones. He didn't understand a word, but their meaning was clear enough. Each one claimed him. One of them patted his chest, then pointed to herself with fierce pride. The other pushed her away, doing the same gesture even louder, stamping her foot and pressing her forehead against his arm like a stubborn child. The human tried to pull free, but their grips only tightened. They might be small, but their strength and determination made it impossible to shake them off. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. Yet as strange as it was, he could not deny one thing. They didn't seem like enemies. If they meant him harm, he would already be dead. Instead, they clung to him with a kind of desperate need, their eyes glowing with something between defiance and fear. The fire crackled low. The soldier sat still, his heart pounding. He had fought battles, faced towering beasts, and walked through ruins filled with death. But this, 2 tiny alien girls battling over his blanket, was somehow more unsettling than all of it. What did they want from him? Why cling to him like this? Then it happened. For a brief moment, the girls stopped fighting. They turned their eyes toward each other, as if reaching an agreement. Then, at the exact same time, they looked up at him. And in a soft, unsteady voice, they both said the same word. The soldier frowned. "What did you just say?" They repeated it, clearer this time. A word he had never heard before, but the tone was unmistakable. It was not a question. It was a declaration. The word meant mate. The soldier's eyes widened. His blood ran cold. They hadn't been fighting over his blanket at all. The blanket was only the excuse. They had been fighting over him. He sat frozen, one girl clinging to each arm, both staring up at him with glowing eyes full of stubborn fire. The jungle around them whispered with danger, but in that moment, the greater threat was clear. He wasn't alone anymore. And the silence of the night had given him something far stranger than an enemy. It had given him two small alien girls, and they had just chosen him. The fight turns strange. The soldier sat stiff as stone, his blanket stretched tight between two small alien girls. Their glowing eyes stared at him, stubborn and unblinking. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. This is insane," he muttered. The girls ignored his words. One tugged the blanket again, growling like a wild cat. The other bared, her teeth, and yanked back harder, her tiny body straining as if the thin cloth was the most important thing in the universe. But the soldier could see it now. The blanket wasn't the prize. He was. He pulled the blanket free with one sharp motion, expecting them to scatter like frightened animals. Instead, they froze, wide-eyed, then lunged, not for the fabric, but for him. The smaller one wrapped both arms around his waist, her glowing eyes daring the other to challenge her. The rival hissed, then climbed up his chest like a determined child, pressing her tiny claws against his shoulder as if to claim her spot. The soldier groaned. "You've got to be kidding me." He tried to push them away, but they clung like vines. No matter how he shifted, their grips only grew tighter. The two girls began to argue again, voices sharp and fast, their strange language like a mix of hisses and musical tones. One pointed at him, then at herself, jabbing her finger against her chest with a proud snarl. The other smacked her hand away, doing the same motion even louder, puffing up her small chest and glaring as if to say, "No, he's mine." The soldier could only stare, caught between disbelief and confusion. "What do you even want from me?" he whispered. Then, to his surprise, the smaller one pressed her hand against his chest and repeated that strange word again, the one they had spoken together before. The other girl growled, shoved her aside, and repeated the same word with more force. The soldier frowned. He didn't know the language, but he didn't need to. The meaning was clear enough. "Mate." They weren't fighting over the blanket. They were fighting over who got to claim him. The soldier shook his head in disbelief. This can't be real. But it was. The two alien girls refused to let go. They clung to him like he was the last tree in a storm. Even when he shifted, even when he tried to stand, they hung on with surprising strength. Despite their size, they weren't weak. Their muscles tensed like cords of steel, their small claws gripping him with stubborn fire. He could tell that, if he tried to run, they would follow and catch him. Hours passed, and still they argued. The soldier sat by the dying fire, staring at the two small forms pressed against him. They hissed at each other, shoved, even pulled at his arms, as if he was the rope in some strange game. Once the smaller one disappeared into the trees. The soldier thought she had left. Relief washed over him. But minutes later she returned, with a handful of glowing fruit, and pressed it into his hands, looking smug. Before he could thank her, the other stomped off into the shadows. She came back, dragging a branch full of bright insects, slamming it down in front of him as if to prove she could provide better. The soldier sighed. They weren't just fighting. They were competing, for him. Night deepened. The fire burned low, again, but the girls didn't sleep. Instead, they sat on either side of him, glaring at each other over his shoulders. At one point, the soldier tried to lie down. Immediately, both girls moved, curling against him, one on his left, one on his right. Their glowing eyes softened for the first time, their tiny hands gripping his arms like anchors. The soldier stared up at the dark canopy, his mind racing. He had been stranded, alone, ready to die in this hostile jungle. Now somehow he had two alien girls no taller than 3 feet fighting over him like he was the most valuable thing they had ever seen. It made no sense, and yet a strange thought crawled into his mind. Maybe, in their own way, they were protecting him, But then came the twist. Just before dawn, when the jungle was still and heavy with mist, the girls stopped arguing. They looked at each other, then at him and spoke in unison, the same word again. Mate. The soldier sat up straight, his heart pounding. They weren't just competing anymore. They had reached a decision, and that decision was him. He pressed a hand to his forehead, shaking. His head. What have I gotten myself into? But as the first rays of light cut through the trees, the soldier realized something important. Whatever this strange bond meant to them, he was no longer alone. And in a world filled with predators, patrols, and death in every shadow, maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Bound by small hands. The jungle morning was heavy with mist. Birds with glassy wings screeched from the treetops, and unseen animals moved through the undergrowth with soft thuds. The soldier woke with a stiff neck and aching body. But worse than the pain was the strange weight pressing on both sides of him. He turned his head slowly. The two alien girls were still there, one curled against his left arm, the other gripping his right as though she had never let go. Their glowing eyes were shut, their breathing slow and steady, but their tiny hands clung to him with the strength of iron. The soldier groaned softly. You two again. He tried to slip free, but the moment he shifted, their fingers tightened. One hissed in her sleep, the other made a low growl, and both pressed closer as if warning him not to leave. By the time the sun broke through the canopy, he had given up trying to pull away. Instead, he sat by the dead fire, chewing the last of his rations. Both girls woke, eyes flashing gold in the light, and immediately turned to each other with sharp stares. The smaller one patted his arm proudly, as if to say mine. The other snarled and hugged his waist, refusing to back down. The soldier sighed. You're going to tear me in half at this rate. But strangely, he didn't feel as angry as he thought he would. Later that morning, the jungle reminded them, all of its dangers. A distant roar shook the trees and branches snapped as something massive moved nearby. The soldier froze, reaching for the stick he had sharpened the night before. His only weapon now. The two girls reacted faster than him. The one on his left hissed, baring her small fangs. The one on his right crouched low, her eyes locked on the trees. Despite their size, their bodies moved like hunters. When the beast emerged, a hulking creature with 4 legs and a jaw filled with jagged teeth, the soldier felt his heart stop. He gripped the stick tightly, knowing it would barely scratch such a monster. But the girls didn't back down. The smaller one threw a rock, striking the beast's snout. It roared, snapping its jaws. But before it could charge, the other girl darted forward, shrieking so loudly the jungle itself seemed to flinch. The creature hesitated, confused by their glowing eyes and shrill cries. That was all the soldier needed. With a shout, he drove his sharpened stick into its neck. The beast stumbled, bellowed in rage, then crashed into the trees before vanishing. The soldier fell back, gasping for air. His hands shook, but he was alive, and when he looked down, he realized why. The two girls were crouched beside him, their tiny claws still hooked into his arms, refusing to let go. The soldier laughed weakly. You saved me, the girls hissed, and snapped at each other, each one pounding her chest as if to say I did more. But then, as if by instinct, they both leaned against him at the same time, pressing their foreheads to his shoulders. He froze. Their grips were no longer about fighting. It was something else, something deeper. They weren't just claiming him, they were protecting him. Hours later, as they walked together through the thick jungle paths, he noticed how carefully they guided him. One tugged his arm whenever his wounded leg stumbled. The other pulled him back from thorny roots before he tripped. At first he thought it was coincidence, but after the 10th time he realized they were watching over him constantly. And yet, their rivalry never stopped. When they found fruit hanging from a glowing vine, the first girl shoved it into his hands with a triumphant hiss. The second immediately stormed off and returned with something bigger, practically dumping it in his lap. The soldier shook his head. You're both impossible. Still, he ate. And for the first time since the crash, he wasn't starving. That night when he set up camp again, the same thing happened. The two girls argued over the blanket, hissing and pushing, until finally they gave up and climbed under it together, on either side of him. Their small bodies pressed close, their glowing eyes fading shut. The soldier lay awake, staring at the fire. He had fought wars, traveled through colonies, and stood before countless alien species. But nothing in all his life had prepared him for this. Two tiny alien girls, no taller than children, clinging to him like he was their lifeline. He closed his eyes slowly. Bound by small hands, he realized he was no longer just surviving in the jungle. He was part of something else now, something he did not understand, but something that gave him a reason to keep moving. The jungle trial. The jungle was alive with noise as the sun climbed high. Insects whined in the thick air, strange birds shrieked in the distance, and the heavy trees seemed to close in tighter around the soldier and his two strange companions. The soldier limped as he walked, his legs still sore from the battle days. Before. Every step was a struggle. Sweat dripped down his face and his strength was fading. But he was not alone. On his left, one alien girl tugged at his arm, guiding him around roots and sharp rocks. On his right, the other pushed gently at his back whenever he slowed. Their small hands never left him. He had never asked for their help, but they gave it anyway. By midday, they stopped in a small clearing. The soldier sat heavily against a tree, closing his eyes. Hunger gnawed at him. His supplies were long gone. Before he could speak, the smaller girl darted into the brush. She returned minutes later with glowing fruit clutched in her hands, pressing it proudly into his lap. The second girl hissed at her, slapped the fruit aside, and stormed off into the shadows. The soldier groaned. Here we go again. Not long after, she returned carrying a bundle of strange roots, dropping them at his feet with a triumphant snarl. The soldier raised his hands. Enough! Both of you, stop fighting! But they only glared at each other, their golden eyes burning with stubborn fire. Each wanted to prove she was the one who could keep him alive. That night, their rivalry grew stranger. The soldier had barely finished making a small fire when the first girl began dragging sticks to build a crude shelter. She stacked them haphazardly into a crooked frame, glaring at her rival the whole time. Not to be outdone, the second girl stomped off and came back with armfuls of large leaves, slapping them down over the frame with sharp hisses. The soldier stared at the crooked, lopsided hut as it leaned dangerously against the tree. He couldn't help but laugh. You two are going to kill me with kindness. The girls froze, their glowing eyes darting to him. For the first time, their snarls faded. Confused, they blinked at his laughter, then sat beside him, pressing their small shoulders against his arms as if needing his approval. Later, when the firelight dimmed and the jungle fell quiet, the soldier lay down to rest. He pulled the blanket over himself, trying to ignore the ache in his body. But the silence didn't last long. The first girl crawled under the blanket, curling tightly against his chest. Her small hands gripped his shirt, her glowing eyes watching him until they finally slid shut. Minutes later, the second shoved her way in from the other side, hissing at her rival before settling in just as close. Her tiny claws hooked into his arm, daring the other to push her away. The soldier sighed, trapped again between the two of them. But strangely, he no longer felt annoyed. Instead, he felt warmth. Real warmth. Not just from the blanket, but from the two small figures pressed against him. As dawn came, the trial of the jungle showed itself again. The trio moved deeper into the forest, searching for safe paths. The soldier stumbled more than once, his strength faltering. Each time the girls caught him, pulling, tugging, refusing to let him fall. When a pack of sharp-fanged creatures crept from the undergrowth, the soldier raised his broken stick to defend himself. But before he could strike, the two girls leapt forward together, shrieking and hissing so loudly the beasts backed away. Side by side, they looked fierce, their golden eyes blazing. For once, they were not fighting each other. They were fighting for him. The soldier stood stunned. These girls, were not just clinging to him for safety. They were proving themselves. Competing, yes, but also showing their worth. That night, as they returned to another small clearing, the soldier leaned against a log and stared at them. "You're not just fighting over a blanket," he whispered. "You're fighting for me." The girls didn't understand his words, but they seemed to understand his tone. They each pressed close, one on his left, one on his right, their tiny hands gripping him tightly. The soldier closed his eyes, realizing the truth. The jungle trial was not about surviving the beasts or finding food. The trial was the two of them, pushing, fighting, proving, and choosing. And somehow, without meaning to, he had become the prize. The hunters arrived. The jungle had grown too quiet. The soldier felt it first. The usual chorus of insect clicks and bird cries was gone. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. He froze, his instincts screaming a warning. The two alien girls sensed it too. Their glowing eyes narrowed, their small hands gripping his arms tighter. They crouched low, their bodies tense, hissing softly as if trying to scare away whatever stalked them. Then the soldier heard it, metal boots crushing leaves. Voices carried through the mist, harsh, clipped words. The sound of rifles being checked. Enemy, hunters. They had come for him. The soldier's heart pounded. He was weak, his body still scarred from battle. With only a sharpened stick for defense, he knew he could not fight a squad of armed soldiers. The two alien girls, however, did not let go. Instead, they pressed against him, growling like tiny beasts ready to strike. Their rivalry was forgotten. Now they were united, against anyone who tried to take him. The soldier whispered, "Hide," but they shook their heads fiercely. Through the trees, figures emerged, tall armored shapes scanning the jungle with glowing visors. One of them spotted movement and raised a weapon. There, gunfire cracked through the clearing. Bullets tore bark from trees and ripped leaves apart. The soldier shoved the girls behind him, shielding them with his body as best he could. He braced for death. But the girls refused to stay hidden. With sudden shrieks, they darted out. One leapt onto a hunter's back, clawing at his helmet. The other hurled rocks, striking another in the faceplate. The hunters stumbled in shock, unprepared for such small, furious attackers. The soldier gasped, "No! Get back here!" But they didn't listen. The jungle exploded into chaos. The soldier swung his sharpened stick, jamming it into the leg joint of a soldier's armor. Sparks flew as the enemy cried out. The girls used their speed, darting between the hunters, legs tripping them, biting, clawing, shrieking. For every strike the soldier made, the girls made too. Together they turned the hunters' formation into disorder. One enemy lifted a rifle to fire at the soldier, only to have one girl bite his arm so hard he dropped the weapon. Another tried to grab the smaller one, but the second girl slammed into him with surprising force, knocking him off balance. Despite their size, the two aliens fought like wild spirits, but the hunters regrouped. "Kill them all," their leader barked. The soldier's blood turned cold. He could not let the girls die for him. Summoning the last of his strength, he roared and charged. His stick shattered against the enemy leader's chest, but the force knocked the soldier back to the ground. The leader raised his blade high, ready to finish him. The soldier shut his eyes. Then a high-pitched shriek split the air. The two alien girls threw themselves between him and the blade. Their glowing eyes burned with defiance as they clung to the soldier's body, daring the hunters to strike. Something happened then. The air grew heavy, charged with strange energy. The girls' glowing eyes flared brighter than ever, their small bodies trembling as if drawing on some hidden strength. The hunters hesitated, their weapons lowering in sudden fear. Then the jungle itself seemed to respond. Vines whipped from the trees, snapping against armor. Roots cracked from the ground, tangling the hunters' feet. The girls' shrieks echoed through the clearing, vibrating like a force of nature. The hunters panicked. Their leader shouted for retreat. Weapons fired blindly into the mist. But one by one, the soldiers fell back, stumbling through the trees, their shouts fading into the distance. Silence returned. The soldier lay on the ground, chest heaving. He looked at the two alien girls crouched over him, their hands still gripping his arms tightly. Their glowing eyes softened, but their grips did not loosen. They had fought for him. They had risked everything for him. And in that moment, the soldier understood they were no longer rivals. They were his guardians. He whispered hoarsely, "You saved me. Both of you." The girls pressed their foreheads against him, one on each side, their small voices repeating the word he now understood fully. Mate. Not just a claim, not just a rivalry. It was a vow. The soldier closed his eyes, exhausted but alive. The jungle trial was over. The hunters had been driven away, and though he did not ask for it, he had been chosen, not by one, but by both. The choice of the small ones. The clearing smelled of smoke and blood. The soldier sat slumped against a fallen tree, his chest rising and falling in heavy breaths. His broken stick lay useless in the dirt. Around him, the jungle had gone quiet again, but it was not the same silence as before. This silence carried weight, as if the forest itself had seen what happened and was waiting for the next move. Beside him, the two alien girls crouched close, their glowing eyes watching him with fierce protectiveness. Their tiny hands never left, his arms as if their grip alone was what kept him alive. He looked at them, his throat tight. They were barely 3 feet tall, smaller than human children, yet they had stood against armored hunters without fear, and they had stood for him. When the soldier finally spoke, his voice was low, rough with disbelief. Why? Why fight for me? The girls tilted their heads, not understanding his words, but they understood the feeling. They pressed closer, each resting her forehead against his chest, their glowing eyes soft but stubborn. Then they both whispered the same word again. Mate. The soldier stiffened. He had heard it before, many times now, but this time it felt different. Not a playful fight, not a childish rivalry. This was a choice. That night, they returned to the cave where he had first made a small camp. The firelight flickered against the stone walls, throwing shadows across the three of them. The soldier sat quietly, his wounds bandaged with strips of his torn uniform. The two girls sat on either side of him, no longer hissing at each other, no longer trying to push the other away. Instead, they held his arms together, their small fingers linked like chains. The soldier frowned. You agreed? He didn't know how, but he could feel it. Their rivalry had ended. They had made a decision, not one girl over the other. Both. In the morning, the truth became clear. The smaller one rose early, darting out into the jungle. She returned with fruit and placed it gently in his hands. The second followed not long after, dragging branches to build a stronger shelter. When the soldier tried to thank one, the other did not hiss or push anymore. Instead, she nodded, accepting it. They were still proud, still fierce. But now they worked together, and everything they did was for him. As the days passed, the soldier realized this was more than instinct. It was ritual, the blanket fight, the clinging hands, the endless rivalry. All of it had been part of something deeper, a trial perhaps, a tradition of their people, and the ending was clear. They had chosen him. One evening, as the sun bled red, across the horizon the soldier sat with both of them by the fire. The jungle crackled with night sounds, but his focus was on the two small figures pressed against him. They looked at each other, then at him, and for the first time they spoke more than one word in his presence. Their strange language flowed, melodic and sharp, but their meaning was unmistakable. They had declared him theirs. Not as a captive, not as prey, but as a bondmate. The soldier's chest tightened. He was a man stranded, broken, with no hope of rescue. But now somehow he had become part of something bigger than survival. He had become the center of a choice made by two small alien girls who refused to let him go. He lay down that night, both girls curling tightly against him beneath the blanket, their tiny hands locked onto his arms as though even sleep would not make them release him. He stared at the cave ceiling, his mind swirling. I didn't ask for this, he whispered, but maybe I needed it. The girls stirred in their sleep, one murmuring mate softly, the other pressing closer as if to remind him of the vow. The soldier closed his eyes. The jungle outside was still full of danger. Hunters might return. Predators still prowled. But he was no longer alone. He had been chosen not by one, but by both. The blanket becomes a bond. The jungle night was cool, the fire's glow flickering softly against the cave walls. The soldier lay wrapped in his worn blanket, and as always the two alien girls pressed tightly against him, one on his left, one on his right. Their small hands clung to his arms, refusing to release him even in sleep. For the first time since the crash, he wasn't thinking about death. He wasn't thinking about rescue or survival. He was thinking about them. He turned his head slowly, looking at their glowing faces resting against his chest. They had fought for him, bled for him, even scared away hunters twice their size. And all of it had begun with a simple blanket. Days passed. The soldier's strength slowly returned. His wounds healed under the care of his strange companions. Every morning one would bring him food, the other would fix the shelter, and by nightfall, they would curl against him beneath the blanket. He began to see it clearly, what had started, as rivalry was no longer about fighting. It was about sharing, about claiming, about bonding. The blanket, once torn between them, was now something they all shared together. One evening, the soldier sat at the fire, sharpening a stick. The two girls sat across from him, arguing softly in their strange tongue. But this time, it wasn't angry. Their voices were calmer, like sisters debating. Finally, they both looked at him, then at the blanket. One girl tapped it proudly, then pointed at him, her golden eyes fierce. The other did the same, nodding firmly. The soldier raised a brow. The blanket was never about the blanket, was it? They didn't understand his words, but their eyes told him everything. The blanket was a symbol. In their culture, to fight for warmth was to fight for a bond. To win it meant to claim. To share it meant a vow. And somehow, both of them had chosen the same vow. That night, the soldier lay under the stars with both girls pressed close. Their glowing eyes stared up at him, unblinking, until they both whispered the word again. Mate. The soldier closed his eyes, his throat tight. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't planned for this, but he understood. They weren't just clinging for survival. They weren't just competing out of stubborn pride. They had chosen him, both of them. The jungle gave no peace. Predators still stalked the shadows, and enemy hunters could return at any time. But something had changed in the soldier's heart. He no longer felt like a lone, dying man. He felt claimed, protected, needed. And in return, he found himself needing them too. At dawn, the soldier rose, blanket around his shoulders. The girls grabbed the edges, tugging at it the way they had on that first night. But instead of fighting, they each held one side, pulling it over their small frames until all three of them stood together under its cover. The soldier laughed softly. So this is it, huh? Our bond. Neither girl spoke, but they pressed their foreheads to his chest, their hands gripping his arms as if to say, yes, forever. The days grew longer and the bond only deepened. Wherever he went, they were at his side. Wherever he slept, they curled against him. And whenever danger came, they faced it as one. The soldier often thought back to that first night, the blanket tugging, the hissing, the confusion. He had believed they were only fighting over cloth. Now he knew the truth. They had been fighting for a future. As the sun set on another day, the soldier sat with them by the fire. The girls whispered softly to each other, then looked up at him with glowing eyes that shimmered like stars. They didn't need to speak. He already understood. The blanket was no longer just his. It was theirs. And beneath it, in the warmth of the fire and the quiet of the jungle, the soldier knew one thing for certain. He was no longer alone. The two alien girls had chosen him, and he had chosen them too.